Welcome. Thank you for joining us today on Ancestry Red's webcast, where we talk about Appalachia all the time. And today we are winding down our Appalachian Women's History Month. This is our first one, so we're really, really proud that we're ending up with the Appalachian Women's Museum. I am thrilled to have the museum here today for a couple of reasons, and you might notice my set is a little bit different. You might notice some quilts in the background. So we're going to be talking about airing of the quilts today. And I did spend this week airing of the quilts. So let's go ahead and introduce the museum to you before I introduce our special guest today. So today we're going to be talking about the Appalachian Women's Museum that is in Dillsboro, North Carolina. It is preserving the stories of ordinary women leading extraordinary lives. They particularly talk about Southern Appalachian women, but really, as you know, when we talk about Appalachia, we're talking about a lot of commonality. So you'll find that it's not just the Southern women, it's women in general. This is the newer version looking of this building. And as we bring the President of the Board of Trustees, Rebekkah Watkins, on to the webcast, she can kind of go through the story of this building because they have done a lot of rehab with this building to get it to where it is today. So before we go any further, let me go ahead and introduce Rebekkah Watkins. Hi, Rebekkah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, I am thrilled that we're going to round up our Appalachian Women's History Month with you because you're the museum for us. You're it. So how long have you been with the museum?
So I actually started volunteering with the Appalachian Women's Museum in the height of COVID.
Oh, wow.
So I moved home. Well, I moved back with my family here, and I was bored. I had nothing to do, and I was finishing up my degree in museum studies, and so I was looking for anything and everything to be able to get back to my love and passion of museums. And they were looking for museum volunteers, and so I hopped on and started volunteering kind of with the collections and helping them get some things organized, and that role kind of transitioned into being a board member. And then from there, I kind of transitioned into vice president. And this past January, so 3 months ago, I took over as president. And so it's been just shy of 3 years in a variety of different roles at the museum. And it has been just excellent. It has been amazing to get to be a part of it.
It is a really, really interesting collection. And I think there's a couple things that I love that you guys do. You bring in outside exhibits, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, and you bring in outside events and you welcome people to come. And it's almost like, example, the airing of the quilts or the music on the porch. It's a show. It's of the Appalachian area and what women and family would do. So I think that's fabulous that as a museum, you don't just say, hey, come in and walk around and then leave. You actually say, yes, please do that, but stay, linger. Learn about the culture. Come back for music on the porch, for example, and have a good time.
Yes, and that's something that is near and dear to my heart. I've been in a variety of different museum roles, different museums all over the place in different sizes, and there's nothing quite like being able to bring the community in a totally different way. We see a lot of young people who are like, well, it's just an old building full of old stuff. And so we're kind of trying to bridge that gap of, yeah, we have a really neat collection. We have some really cool old items, but it's still really relevant, and it's really relevant in Appalachian culture and Appalachian history. And we kind of continue that discussion and that push through these events and community outreach.
I think it's brilliant. It's a great match. So why don't we talk a little bit about what's going on? So I know that the history of the museum, the house was in really, really, really poor shape. And I correct me if I'm wrong, I think the city donated the house.
So it went to the ownership of Dillsboro after the last Monteith sister had passed away. The local doctor was in charge of all of their final wishes and things like that. And so the house went to Dillsboro, and this wonderful group of women in the area was like, no, 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 like we cannot let this house fall apart. We can't let it be torn down. And they went to work, and they worked with Dillsboro to get the deed into the hands of the Appalachian Women's Museum organization as a whole. And that was back in 2005, 2007, kind of around that area of time. And they went to work, and it was in such disrepair. There was roofs to be fixed and floors to be fixed and attics full of things. And you could tell people had been in and out taking things and whatnot while there was no one on site.
Wow.
And so it was just a ton of damage to be fixed. And so for the last, I mean, I would say probably close to 10, 12 years, it's really just been, we've got to get this house fixed up enough that people can come into it. And that's kind of where we're at now. We're kind of at that next phase of, we've got this beautiful, magnificent house. And we've got some of the sisters and the Monteith family's collections. Now we can start doing things with it. And that, since I've become president, that's one of my big focuses, is we've got all this stuff. I want people to see it. I want people to be able to interact with it. And so, like I said, it's definitely this big phase change from getting the house to doing something with the house. And if you look on our website, you'll see pictures of what it looked like prior to getting fixed. And it was rough. And I wish I would have seen it in that situation, but I'm glad I get to see it now that it's more welcoming and fixed up.
Let me see. I think I can, let me see if I can bring that up. And I think, you've got really good timing as well, what you're trying to do with this space, because COVID's over and people are traveling. And we were talking a little bit about how people are not only traveling, but they're traveling with a purpose. Let me see if I can find, I think it was behind the scenes, or was it on your blog that you had the original picture? Maybe my producer can find it for us.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere located on the behind the scenes homepage, somewhere around there, where you can see pictures of the original house when they got it into the possession of the museum. Because
it definitely did not look like the picture that you see here. It's an amazing renovation, and the cost alone, and I know this because if you look at the house now, who of us hasn't wanted like this quaint old country house with the beautiful porch? And as you go looking for them yourselves, you can tell there's a lot of work that needs done. And then when you look at the original pictures, which my producer in the background is looking for the pictures, but as you look at the original pictures, you're like, oh my, that's a lot of money that you guys needed for that. That was a lot of work. So I applaud you guys for keeping it, because a lot of people might have looked at it and said, no, we can't do that. But let me get back to what we were talking about with travel and COVID. So Rebekkah and I were talking backstage a little bit, and we were talking about how since COVID's over, people are traveling more with a purpose. And one of my examples was we used to go and drive down to Disney World and stop at the infamous South on the Border. That's one thing that we used to do. But my dad would actually look to find cultural things to do along the way. And I feel like this is going to be the future. So I love that you guys are having the events and activities to actually bring people there, have people stop if they're driving by. There we go. Thank you for the producer to bring up. I mean, look at this house. This is amazing that you guys took this on.
And it was all with like community support, community donations. The county stepped in and helped out a lot too. I mean, it wouldn't have happened without all of that support.
I'm just in shock. So how long did it take to get from that to where you are today? I guess you're still continuing.
Yeah, it took several years. I believe right before everything went into shutdown is when the roof was finally replaced. So it's only been the last 4-5 years that the big cosmetic things have finished. So it's been a long going project, and that's one of those things that, I mean, right now we're still working on we're almost there, getting running water back into the house, because after the family had passed on, that was all removed. And so it's little things like that that people don't realize. For a museum, that's important. And to get up a house, those are some of those things that, running water is important.
It is.
And things like that.
Okay, so now that everybody's seen this, let me go ahead and bring up the picture again of the house now. So you guys have done an amazing job. And I do want to point out too that Rebekkah mentioned the reason why she's not live streaming at the museum itself. That was the goal. If there's no water, guess what? There's no internet either. So keep that in mind. So I think that you guys have done a really wonderful job. So we're coming up, and in April, usually in the South, it is known that you really don't plant anything in the South until after April 15th, tax day, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, we do have, I'll mention, we do have a couple planting series coming up next month. But what I want to do is kind of get the thought going with you. You guys have starting a victory garden.
Yes. So out back of the house, there is this beautiful garden that actually got started during COVID. There was a bunch of women who wanted to get together, and they started the garden and they brought it back. And it was this idea that the Monteith sisters who lived in this house, they had a garden. And when the family was on the property, there was 15 acres. And a lot of that acreage was used for farming, but the sisters always kept a garden going. And so now that the house is back and we're honoring kind of the story of the Monteith family and the sisters, the garden women, the garden ladies, that's what we call them, they have done a fantastic job recreating a victory garden. And I do have to say, everything that comes out of that garden goes to local food banks and local churches. So it goes right back into the community. And that's so awesome. It is just this, full circle of community members and the garden ladies who are in the community fixing it up and doing all the growing. And then all of that produce goes right back into the community. And so it's just one of those things where we're honoring the story of the sisters and Appalachian women who gardened and fed their families that way, into supporting the community through the same idea. And it is all volunteer based.
That's awesome. And that supporting is also an Appalachian trait. We talk about, barn raisings, or if somebody was sick. We had one of our webcasts last month, a gentleman had a heart attack and said the community came in to help him. And that's Appalachian. And we always kind of like, in a lot of our chats that we do outside of this webcast, one of the first things we talk about is if there's a need, Appalachians come in. And what you guys are doing is creating the solution and try, at least with the veggies and the garden and the vegetables. So that's a beautiful living part of your museum, is your community outreach.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes, very much so.
Now you have, do you still have the Cherokee Indian Museum exhibit in the museum?
Yes. So that exhibit, the Cherokee exhibit, is still up and coming. It was another, we received a grant from the Cherokee Preservation, and they are wonderful in supporting outreach of Cherokee women and Cherokee stories. And so through that grant, we are able to be putting together this exhibit that showcases the first of many Cherokee women. And so it's important to note that Appalachian women is an overarching, term of so many different women. And so in that process, we really wanted to honor some of the firsts of the Cherokee Nation also.
And I think that's wonderful. We always say when we define where Appalachia is, well, the first thing we say is it's complicated. But the one thing that really truly isn't complicated about Appalachia is diversity. It's always been there. It's been there since the very beginning. And Appalachia, it is diverse. And when we talk about the women, I'll mention that a lot of the reasons why we eat cornbread, that came from the Cherokee Indians, the women that were making the cornbread. So I'm really happy to see that you're bringing in diversity into the museum as well. You guys are really looking at the whole picture of what an Appalachian woman is, as opposed to a lot of times we find, Hollywood and other places tend to narrow what we are and who we are. So it's really awesome to see your museum do that. And so what do you think is an Appalachian woman? And I guess part two is, why is it important that we have this museum to showcase them?
So I would say an Appalachian woman is anyone who kind of fulfills the ideals of Appalachia. And so that might be in the activities they're doing, in the food they're making, in just the personality and love that they're exuding, because anyone who has met an Appalachian woman knows that those are all traits. Those are this big heart and welcoming you onto their porch, and welcoming you home, even if it's not your home. And so I think that's really important to honor with this museum, because there's so many Appalachian women and so many Appalachian women's stories. But I also think for a lot of years, that story wasn't told. And so I think it's important that we bring that story to the forefront with this beautiful home that was run by Appalachian women. And we tell those stories, and it might be, Appalachian authors, it might be Appalachian cooks, Appalachian businesswomen. All of those things, all of those stories tell the legacy of Appalachia. And, in the past, a lot of times they were the ones keeping a family going, keeping a farmstead going. And, they played such a significant role, and yet their stories weren't told. You don't typically see them in the history books. No. And so by putting them on the forefront with this museum, we're getting it out there. Whether it's in a book or not, we're getting it out there, and people can see it firsthand and experience it. And we've had a lot of people who come into the museum and they're like, oh my gosh, this feels like my grandmother's house. Like they feel that Appalachian spirit right there in the house.
I can understand that. I believe that, because I could tell you, I know the storms that went through the South yesterday were pretty bad, and my mom's house got the outside of the trees got hit pretty bad. So I'm not sure. She's usually in chat, but she does not talk. But I will tell you that the way that you describe, the home and the welcoming is my grandmother and my mom exactly. If you came, none of my friends understood. If you came in my house and they'd say, "Can I get something to drink?" Ours was like, "There's the cupboard. Go get it. You have open up the fridge, have whatever you want." And they would look at us like, "What?" And it's like, an Appalachian woman is like, what I have, you have. If I cook it, eat it. And then you're taking home, at the time, my mom, it was a big Tupperware full of food with you. So, I will tell you, Appalachian women, they are very welcoming, and we feed you well as we go through.
Yes.
But I think you're right. It is, I think that when our whole idea of these webcasts started is we wanted to change the narrative of Appalachia. And on a sub topic with that, we want to change the narrative of the Appalachian woman as well, because they are not out there. And when they do get out there in TV land or Hollywood land, they're not exactly portrayed accurately. So I love it that you have this museum where you can go in and you can see the work that they did. These, back in the day, in the 1800s, into the early 1900s, these women, they worked at a full-time family. They put out food at least 2 to 3 times a day. And like you said, with your property there with Monty's, they had farms, and they are helping there too, and making sure that the farm workers are also fed, and they'll go in and help in the farm. And they had, just like you guys do, their own garden. that they had
Yeah.
for personal use. So I'm already exhausted just thinking about that. But I love that your museum has little bits and pieces that shows all that. And I think the Monteith name, that's a pretty popular name in North
Mhm.
Carolina. And
Mhm.
I know that a lot of genealogists that also watch are from North Carolina and love the North Carolina mountains area. So I'm positive that they would recognize that particular name as well. Well, what is the modern day Appalachian woman? Do we still carry, do you find that we carry the traditions of the past? You know, we might not have the full farm or the full garden, but do we still carry some of our traits from our ancestors?
Yeah, I definitely think we do, and I think through some of those community programs that we often host and hold, we see that. And so whether it be airing of the quilts, where people
Mhm.
are bringing their quilts or their family's quilts and talking about them and showcasing them. Quilting was a huge thing. Quilting bees, all sorts of things like that. That's still very much going on. Those activities are still going on. The canning, the gardening. I mean, you know, in modern times there may be too much going on to be able to run a full-fledged farm and everything like they did in prior years of Appalachian history. But I think those women, the modern day Appalachian women, they are carrying on that legacy, whether it be through feeding their families, feeding their communities, working local jobs, creating businesses, very much still there. And like you mentioned, that trait of come on in, everybody's
Yeah.
welcome, like that is very much alive and still being pushed out from Appalachian women. And it just continues on. And I will say that one of the sisters actually did have a job outside of the house. She was the Dillsboro postmistress. She took it over from her father. And so that was really unusual at the time. And I think that piece of the story really shows that Appalachian women aren't just at home. They're out in their community doing stuff and serving their community in many ways. So I think that kind of entails that the modern day Appalachian woman is still running strong.
And it's funny, when you talk to a cookbook author and she's like, I still do the food, but I take shortcuts. So I might buy my veggies already chopped at the grocery store or potatoes, or I might buy a rotisserie chicken instead of cooking it and then picking it and making the chicken and dumplings. So I love that the modern day woman is still doing a lot of the history of their ancestors and what even they grew up with, but they're finding shortcuts. I think that's brilliant as well. And you mentioned one of the magic phrases, airing of the quilts.
Yes.
So I will tell you, everybody, I am in North Georgia, and this week we finally did not have rain and we had 80-degree weather, and I did air my quilts outside. So, but could you tell us a little bit about the tradition of the airing of the quilts, and then also tell us about the special airing of the quilts at the museum?
Yeah. So airing of the quilts is kind of a tradition that happens a lot in Appalachian families. And it was really common at the Monteith farmstead, where after a long winter of cold and having to run the fireplaces and having all that stuff in the house and maybe some sickness and things and all the windows closed up, things get a little stuffy and dry and all those yucky things. And then we finally get sunshine in the Appalachian region and we get some warm weather like you mentioned. And so that's the time where we take all of our quilts that we've snuggled up with all winter long. We air them out. We get that fresh air flowing through them and get them freshened up and ready to put away until the next winter comes. And so it's this kind of family tradition of, all right, today's the day we are spring cleaning and we are getting all of this winter blues out of the house and we are starting fresh. And so we like to honor that kind of tradition at the museum through the airing of the quilts event. And so this has happened for several years in the past. And then, of course, that darn COVID shut it down and people couldn't come for it.
Yeah.
And so that was actually one of the things that I did my first year as a volunteer was I helped transition airing of the quilts to an online format. Now, It is not the same, but we did share a lot of quilt facts, quilt patterns, some activities for kids to do that, had to do with quilts. And so we're finally ready to bring it back and have people come back and see quilts. And so on May 6th, we are opening the museum up for airing of the quilts. And so some of the Monteith quilts will be out. And then we invite the community to register and bring their quilts and showcase them.
Oh, that's
And
really
so,
cool. Okay, so
yeah.
then so everybody watching, if you guys want a road trip, then register on your website and bring your
Yes.
quilts.
Yes. And so it's a day-long event of people being able to look at quilts and talk to each other about quilts. And there's usually some quilt scraps being swapped back and forth, patterns being swapped back and forth. And it's just a really, really nice day to be able to kind of experience that Appalachian tradition. And there's so many people who love quilting and things like that. And so it kind of brings out that tradition of that good feeling of welcomeness.
And I like it. We were talking after COVID. It's time. It's time for everybody to come out. And to me, this is the perfect event. Not only are you airing the quilts from the winter, it's almost symbolic of you're airing the quilts of not being able to travel, not being able to go into museums and events and festivals. So to me, this is just like a perfect event to start off the travel season. So if anybody is nearby or you want a road trip, then I would definitely stop by for this, because there's just, there's something about quilts and the craftsmanship that just amazes. And I will tell you, even my husband will look at a quilt and, he's a math guy. So he will look at it differently. He will look at it from a mathematical, and then I will tell him, you know how long it took to do that? So my math is a little different. My math is, it took a lot of time. And we actually, in one of our Discord channels, one of the ladies has a quilt, I want to say from her great-great-grandmother, and it has blood stains on the back of it for where she pricked her fingers. So we kind of laugh about, the DNA is there. So she has it all the way through. Quilts were also, if you were getting married, there would be that quilting, the community would come together to make your first quilt. I've been asking everybody, how many quilts do you have? And I will tell you, I will not admit how many I have. Some people collect keychains, teaspoons, all kinds of different things. I collect quilts, and I'm ashamed to admit how many I have. And my poor son, he's going to look at this like, what am I supposed to do with all these quilts? What am I going to do with them? But definitely, if you guys are nearby, you have quilts from the Monteiths that have to be very, very old.
Yes. And so there are some that came from the Monteith mom, their mother, and there's also some the sisters themselves quilted, and those are really special because you can see the hand stitching that the sisters did on those quilts. And it's always a really good day to be able to showcase those and bring them out so people can see them and see that story of these were two sisters who were hand quilting, and many of their clothes they sewed themselves also, but the quilts they're so delicate. And there's some that they made them out of their dad's like old farm clothes and things like that. So you see all those scraps in there and all the stories from that. And the collection we also have, we have a quilt that was donated from a Cherokee woman who made one. And so again, that diversity is kind of woven in through there, that all Appalachian women quilted, and all Appalachian women quilts can tell a story. And so all of those things come out with Airing of the Quilts, and we're really excited to have it back and to bring people out and to see people in the community's quilts, because those are even more stories that can be told.
Well, I didn't ask, and I should have asked, for the Monteith. Did they ever marry?
No. So there are lots of different kind of stories behind the scenes of why, but for the most part, they're just the two sisters who, once their parents passed away, they lived in that house and they took care of each other. Which, having two sisters, I mean, like, I get it. And so they had cats and they gardened and they ran that house till they passed away. And I think that's really special that they really kept it in their family, all the way up to the end.
And then one other question about the quilts from them. Were they still in that house that had become pretty dilapidated?
So some of them have definitely seen some better days, but some of them were kind of buried under things, and so they actually preserved pretty well. And then some of them other people had and brought them back to the museum. Like I said, some things kind of got taken, displaced and things in those years until the museum got the house again, and slowly items are coming back, and they're the ones that are probably in the best shape because they've been taken care of. But people are realizing that, they belong at the museum. It was the sisters and things like that. And so some of those have come back, and some of them are they're behind glass because they are they're very delicate at this point. So,
well, that's amazing.
But we're lucky to have them.
I would say that's amazing because even like you said, just they could have gotten water damage or chewed by wild animals, or as you said, people were helping themselves to items from the house. So it's amazing that you have some left over. Okay, so we talked about airing of the quilts. That's the big rite of passage for me for spring. So again, if you're anywhere near the area, register. Bring your quilts. If you're not near the area, then is there an online version? Can we follow along on your Facebook page or anything like that?
So I will be there during the event, and I will be personally putting pictures up on Facebook, on Instagram. Right. I'll be doing some live videos. So we'll have some internet interaction throughout the day to bring people who are, far into seeing some of the quilts and some of the stories and things like that.
That's great. Okay. Now let's talk about another fun event that you have, Music on the Porch. And this year it's a little different, I think, because you're having an organization of kids come in.
Yes. So in the past, so last year we had our schedule all got mixed up. And so Music on the Porch actually ended up being kind of the early summer-ish rather than in the fall. But we're back to our usual schedule of having Music on the Porch. It's in October. And so it is the big event is Music on the Porch in October. And that is where we bring in local musicians, and they come and they perform throughout the day, and there's food trucks, and it's just a live performance right there on the Monteith porch, and people can come watch and eat and socialize and all sorts of things. But one of the things that we're really trying to introduce is bringing the Junior Appalachian Musicians program more into the Appalachian Women's Museum. So the jam program is actually located up at the Blue Ridge School in Cashers. So it's about 40 miles away from the museum. And it is students that range from the ages of like 3rd grade to middle school, high school. And they come and perform, and we actually have them coming for the first time on April 15th. And so I'm really excited to have them come, and they are going to be performing with Susan Pepper, who is a local musician, and they showcase Appalachian music, so banjos and singing and all sorts of different things, and they learn all of that from local musicians after school. And so it's this really, really great organization who inspires this new generation to come together through Appalachian music. And so that's a really great organization that they are actually just getting themselves back up and running also after a couple of years. So I'm excited to have those students come and perform and hopefully be back for our big Music on the Porch event also in October, and just continuing that story of Appalachian music and encouraging future generations to realize just how impactful Appalachian culture is. And everybody connects through music. And so I think having this tie to Appalachian music is really important. And that is actually also one of our exhibits in the house, is the music room, where we have some old instruments and things that, you know, showcase what Appalachian music was like and continues to be.
And I think that's great that it's such an interesting group. If you've never heard of them, definitely check them out, because these kids want to learn this music. This is not like something that they do in school where it's for a grade. Their teacher tells them you have to go through course class. These kids really want to do this, and it shows. Their passion for this shows. So it's really, really awesome that this organization is created. And this one just says Blue Ridge, but they do have other regions too. So definitely check out their website. And maybe we can convince them also to come on to a future webcast, because as I know, a lot of our viewers love the music programs that we have. Now let's move on to Weaving on the Porch that you have coming up at the end of April. Is that a new event for you guys?
So that's going to be just kind of a smaller scale demonstration that's coming to the museum. Some local women are coming to showcase some weaving. It's really low scale event. It's just kind of a stop on by and see some demonstrations and chat about how it works and things like that. And so that's kind of our goal, is to have some of these really big welcoming events, and then having just some smaller demonstrations and some community members getting to show off these skills that are so important in Appalachian history and Appalachian culture. And we've had canning demonstrations and pickling demonstrations and all sorts of things, because those are all rooted right there in the culture and history. And so having this grandiose porch and all this space outside really gives us a chance to bring back that community tie that in Appalachian history you would have these things going on. People would come together and can for a day, or play music together and have a jam session and things like that. And we're bringing it back, and we're giving the community a space to do those things. And like I said previously, that is, as a president of this board, that is something that I just want to continue to do, is this community outreach, because this house wouldn't be there without the community. And so it's us giving back to the community this space to continue those traditions.
And it's also a good thing for the community too. And I will ask you towards the end. I didn't give you warning on this, but this will be an easy question. For the community, it's important that we also support them as well. So when you travel, it's important in any community that you travel to, especially after COVID, that we support the local restaurants, we support the local museums, we support the local visiting areas and tourists and things like that in the parks. It's really important that we give back. COVID was tough for us, guys. And if you look at the Appalachian Women's Museum, I think this is really a good case study for this. You saw what it looked like way before COVID, but they were still in the middle of working on it and fixing it and making it, like you said, a place where you can come with running water and you're still working on that. COVID hurt a lot of these places. So we're so thankful that a place like the Appalachian Women's Museum still managed to share the content online to keep people engaged and still surviving and standing pretty strong. So I guess then with that, what is on the museum's to-do list? What else do you need to do to fix her up? And how can we support you as an online community?
So for me, and the rest of the board, I guess I should say just me, as the board meets and discusses, bringing in freshening up the exhibits. Like I said at the very beginning, we're in this next phase of bringing things to the people. And so we really want to freshen up exhibits and get more information out and kind of see what's important to the community. And so we're working towards an education exhibit for Appalachian educators. We finally got the Dillsboro post office that was in the house when the Monteith family were the postmasters. And so showcasing that story a little bit, and the sisters' post office uniform on display and things like that. And so exhibits is our biggest thing that we're working towards right now, is giving visitors something to see and something to talk about. And then for me personally, as an educator outside of the museum role, I am really pushing for some education materials and things so that we can get these stories into teachers' hands and homeschooling hands, and getting school groups to the museum and things like that, because we all know that hands-on education is a wonderful thing. And seeing things in person is really impactful. And a lot of these Appalachian students have no idea that this museum exists. And so being able to get some of these stories into the hands of young people helps us continue that generational learning of their history. And so that is kind of the small scale things we're working on. We are an entirely volunteer-based organization. And so we're looking towards hopefully getting funding to create some staff positions and things like that. And so those are some of those big pieces, those logistical pieces. The Wi-Fi, that would be
Wi-Fi, the running water. It's funny because I smile and I kind of giggle when you're like, these are just small things. And I'm like, no, these are all really great things. When I say grand, some of them might be grand as large, like putting all plumbing pipes through might sound like grand and large, but also getting that education out, because that's what sparks an interest in somebody learning a banjo or learning to weave or wanting to quilt on their own. That's what keeps our traditions going, is that outreach to education. So that's fabulous goals that you guys have.
Yes.
Is the house pretty much done as far as construction, except for the water? Yeah.
Yes. So water is the last big piece. And then there's some work that we want to do on the flower house and the canning house, but those are up to standard. So they're standing, which is good. So all of the structures are in good enough shape for visitors. But now it's just kind of fixing up those outbuildings to keep those going as well.
Well, I think that you guys have really stood strong. I mean, if I would have saw that house, I don't know if I could have seen the vision of where you are today. It must have been overwhelming for those who originally said, yes, let's make this into an Appalachian Women's Museum. And I love seeing how you're all volunteer, where you have ladies come in to do the garden. You have volunteers on your board that are sitting there for the better good of the museum. You guys are a mini think tank on how we can continue these Appalachian traditions. And we do say women's traditions, but as we know, men are included in the general Appalachian topic as well. But I love that you're continuing the traditions, but also doing the outreach and also including the diversity. So I think that is a really awesome package for the museum. How much does it cost to visit your museum at this time?
So right now we are donation funded. So we just ask people to donate what they can when they come to the museum. And we hope that, there will someday be a spark of big donations that will help us reach some of those big goals. But right now we really want to make sure that it's a space that everyone can come to, regardless of how much they can donate. And so it's kind of a suggested donation of $5 here or there. But like I said, we really want to make sure everyone can come. And so we don't want to put a price tag on being able to experience the house and events that we might have and things. Now, some of our larger events like Music on the Porch, we usually do tickets, and then we bring in some revenue that way. But in terms of visiting, we run it on donations of what people can or are willing to pay to come see the house.
And you're a nonprofit, correct?
Yes.
So for those of you that are not local, that are a little bit further away, you know, in the United States, as a nonprofit, that is another way that you can also donate. A tax time is coming up. If anybody needs a spot to donate some money, then you could definitely reach out to Rebekkah at the Appalachian Women's Museum. So I guess then as we wind down, I think you've given us a really good idea of who the Appalachian woman was, but also continues to be. And that makes me very, very proud. A little misty too, because as we talked about this, I can reminisce about my own Appalachian women ancestors and realize that I do have some of their traits and I do try to keep some of their traditions going. I do not farm a big farm and have 12 kids, but that was more the 1800s. But I do appreciate the fact that you guys have kept this going. And like I said, you're continuing the outreach. And thank you for sharing the museum with us today. And I look forward to seeing the museum in person. I'm not too far away. So I do look forward to seeing the museum in person. But I also want to thank you and the board for continuing the history, but also realizing that history is made every day, and you're continuing with that as well in protecting this beautiful home. So thank you, Rebekkah, for joining us today. And maybe we can convince you to come back in the future before you do the Music on the Porch and give us a little sneak peek. But maybe we can convince you to do a quick little live webcast with us for airing of the quilts as that goes through. Because we would, I know we would all love to see it.
Chatting with you.
So, and I just want to remind everybody that, as always, at the top of every chat screen, we post the links for the guest, and Appalachian Museum, Women's Museum link is always at the top, but also down at the description. And we've included some of the dates of their events as well. Definitely stop by and enjoy the quilts, enjoy the exhibits. And I tell you that Music on the Porch with the food trucks, I think it has my name on it. So definitely that. And then we hope we hope to see you again soon. So thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you.